I knew everything. I was waiting for her to say one true word, some small admission, anything that might have let me believe we could rebuild. Instead, she spat out a lie so bright and sharp it stung like salt in an open wound. I stood there in our living room, our son's toys scattered across the carpet, thinking how strange it felt to want something as simple as, "I'm sorry," it received pure dismissal. Maybe it was the tension in her eyes, or the way she wiped at her mouth, as if I'd left a bitter taste. In that moment, I understood. No matter how long I waited, no matter how I begged for honesty, none was coming. It was all just an echo, a hollow shell of the woman I believed I knew. I wish I could tell you I was proud or noble when I realized the betrayal, that I shouted something heroic or staged a dramatic exit. But I didn't. I just stood there, remembering how I ended up in this slow, strangling labyrinth of half-truths. Maybe it began weeks earlier, with something so mundane it almost seemed comical. The day the courier brought those tasting kits, the so-called DNA wine match, a flashy gimmick that promised to find your perfect varietal based on your genetic profile. It felt like a silly idea. Emily's idea, of course. "Come on, Mark, it'll be fun," she said, smiling that hopeful grin of hers. "It's all the rage now. Genetic tastes. Personalized wine. It'll be a laugh." I'd had no reason to suspect anything then. My biggest problem was deciding if I'd prefer a sweet Merlot or a bold Cabernet. I teased her, tapping the small plastic tube. "Guess we'll find out which one of us is genetically inclined to cheap table wine." We laughed, and that laughter was genuine. At least I believed it was. But now, looking back, I wonder if that day was the first black note in a discordant melody that would end in heartbreak. She told me to spit into the vial, seal it up, and give it to the courier. A novelty, apparently, some new synergy of marketing and science. "They'll analyze it, send back a recommendation with a fancy label," she said. "We can host a party. Invite our friends to sample the wine the test picks for us." I didn't mind. It seemed harmless. But she seemed more excited than I'd expected, as though her entire life depended on this simple test. A few days later, the envelope arrived, and I remember tossing it on the kitchen table before heading to work. When I came home, Emily wasn't in the living room. I found her in the bedroom, holding that envelope with both hands, scanning the contents over and over. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. "What's wrong?" I asked. She just shook her head, forced a weak laugh, and murmured, "It's nothing. They said I might like a certain wine. Kind of weird results, but you know these tests can be inaccurate." She shoved the papers into a drawer before I could read them. Something in me tensed. Why hide something so trivial? Why not just say, "Hey Mark, they think I'm more of a Planet Grigio gal," or some nonsense? The more I asked, the more she avoided, changing the subject to dinner plans, or a new color scheme for the living room. It was a quiet dismissal, but the chill in her voice lingered. For the first time in our marriage, I felt outside our shared life, like she'd built a wall between us. That wall only grew thicker after I found the second kit in the mail, one with my name carefully typed on the label, except I hadn't ordered anything. The instructions were straightforward. "Thank you for your interest in our advanced genetic screening. Please collect your sample and mail it using the enclosed packaging." I didn't recall signing up, but Emily insisted it was probably a follow-up or an error. She was so hurried, so eager to snatch it away from me. I saw her eyes flicker with something deeper than mere curiosity. Fear, maybe, guilt. The next day, I decided to go out on my own and buy a proper genetic paternity test kit, something more serious than the wine nonsense. I picked it up at a pharmacy on the other side of town, away from neighbors' curious eyes. I remember parking in a deserted lot, reading the instructions half a dozen times, feeling my pulse throb in my ears. This was madness, I told myself. I had no reason to suspect. Emily and I had been married for years. Our son was 5. No, he was almost 6 now. Why was I so paranoid? Why did my gut twist into knots every time she glanced at that hidden envelope in the drawer? I filled out the forms with shaky hands, pressed my name in bold letters, Mark Townsend, and the child's name, Noah Townsend. It felt surreal, like drafting a will or signing a confession. With each scribble of the pen, I silently prayed I was wrong. I wanted to feel foolish for doubting her. I wanted to tear it all up and toss the pieces into the wind. But time, that sly enemy, had eroded my blind trust. The kit shipped off, and I waited. Through every anxious day, I caught myself scanning Emily's face for signs. Signs of guilt, signs of sorrow, signs of relief that maybe I hadn't put it all together. And each day, she was quieter, more withdrawn. 2 weeks later, the results came in. One line of text jumped at me like a knife to the chest. Probability of paternity, 0%. It felt like a hammer blow. I'm not sure how long I stood in the hallway, reading and rereading those words, as if they might rearrange themselves. It had been my name on the birth certificate, my arms cradling him in the hospital, my voice singing lullabies at night. All that love, and suddenly science was telling me it meant nothing. That biologically, he wasn't mine. I confronted her, or tried to. Late that night, after Noah was asleep, I sat across the kitchen table from her. My hands trembled. Hers were folded primly in her lap as she stared at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. "What did you want to tell me, Mark?" she asked, voice tight. And so I laid it out. My suspicion, the test results, the heartbreak. I told her I just needed to hear her say something real, to give me the dignity of an explanation. She responded with silence first, then with a litany of half-truths. "It's not what you think. There must be a lab error. It's complicated." Over and over, she repeated the same lines like a stuck record. Eventually, she grew defensive, standing up so fast her chair screeched. "You're overreacting. You've always been controlling, Mark. You do these tests. You snoop around. God, it's suffocating." My chest felt heavy. I wanted to shout, to smash my fists against the table, to make her see the cruelty of her words. But all I could do was sit there, swallowing down the bitter taste of betrayal. The next day, an unplanned confession came from her mother. A slip of the tongue, or maybe a deliberate jab. "I'm just glad Emily still has John. He's a good man, and you know she needs him." She said it so casually, as if John were some kind of necessary fixture in Emily's life. Her eyes flickered to me, then away, sensing the tension. My heart thudded like a war drum in my ears. "John?" I asked. "Manicurist John." That was the first time I heard his name from someone else's mouth, confirming the suspicion that had grown in the back of my mind. John was a mobile nail technician, a chatty guy who came by to do Emily's manicures at home. I never paid him much attention, even when I saw how he'd rest his palm on her shoulder while picking out polish colors. But now, everything clicked into place. The way he lingered, the quick hush when I entered the room, the flashes of his smile directed at her. Suddenly, it all looked painfully obvious. A few mornings later, I feigned heading out to work, then doubled back and parked down the street. I crept around the side of the house, heart pounding so hard I feared I'd break a window with it. Emily's car was in the driveway. John's battered old sedan was out front. My hand shook as I tried the back door. Unlocked. The hallway was quiet, too quiet, like the house was holding its breath. Step by step, I made my way to our bedroom. I heard them before I saw them. Muffled laughter that slid into hushed moans, the rustle of sheets, her voice saying his name with a kind of urgency I'd only heard in the earliest days of our marriage. My mind went blank, then flared hot with images I still can't erase. His hands on her bare skin, her eyes closed in a rapture that I hadn't witnessed in ages. They were tangled together, half-dressed, the midday sun casting harsh shadows across the bed. I stood there in the open doorway, my throat turned to desert sand. I wanted to roar, to tear him off her. But something else happened. A chilling calm flooded me, draining the heat from my limbs. Time slowed, each beat of my heart stretching into an eternity. She saw me first, her face twisting into horror. John scrambled off her, fumbling for clothes, stammering half-baked apologies. I expected to lose my mind, to leap over the bed in a blind rage. Instead, I turned around, walked back into the hallway, and closed the door behind me. I think I heard her say my name once, in a whisper. Then there was just silence. It felt like an hour or more before John emerged, hair disheveled, t-shirt inside out. He nodded at me, obviously terrified. I couldn't tell if it was fear of a beating or fear of something else. I stood there, arms at my sides, no words, no visible anger. He just skulked past me, out the front door, leaving the faint smell of lemon-scented polish in his wake. I heard his car rumble off down the street. Then I heard Emily's footsteps behind me. "Mark," she said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry. You're not supposed to find out like this." I laughed bitterly. Not supposed to find out or not supposed to find out this way. She opened her mouth, closed it, tears welling up. But the tears felt hollow, an afterthought, as if she were more upset about being caught than about what she'd done. I waited for her to say something real, anything that might give me a shred of hope. But all that came were feeble excuses. We drifted apart. You never see me. I needed affection. Lies. Self-serving justifications. She said she was sorry, but her eyes, red and frantic, seemed to hold no regret. Only fear. In the days that followed, we barely spoke. She slept in the guest room. I spent my nights pacing the house, every corner brimming with memories I could no longer bear. The photos on the mantel, our wedding day, our honeymoon in Hawaii, the day we brought Noah home. All of it felt like a mausoleum to a life that no longer existed. I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. Puffy eyes, unshaved stubble, that lost look of a man who'd been gutted from the inside. I tried to talk to her again, to find a path forward or at least define what was left of us. She'd nod, say a few contrite words, but there was always a distance. The cold detachment stung more than the initial betrayal. She was there physically, but her soul was somewhere else. Maybe with John, or maybe just drifting in some emotional limbo where I had no place. Each day, time felt heavier, pressing down on me, reminding me of all the years we built together and how quickly they were unraveling. A week later, her mother visited. I pretended not to notice the complicit looks they exchanged. Over coffee, her mother casually repeated her stance. "At least she's with John now. It's better this way. She needs him." The words punched me in the gut. I realized I was the outsider in my own home, in my own marriage. Nobody was even trying to keep up the facade. I was the relic, the stale caretaker of a house that no longer felt like mine. That was when I decided on my own brand of revenge, or maybe you'd call it a final act of grace. I opened the old safe in my study, the one containing my father's watch, some emergency cash, and a few other valuables. I took out half the money, left the rest. I wrote a note that said, "John, this is your chance. Take her. Walk away in style." I placed it on top of the remaining bills, left the watch there too, and left the safe door cracked open. Then I walked out, leaving the door to the study ajar. If he wanted to swoop in and rescue her, let him do it. If she was so desperate to be with him, let them have the means to escape. I thought it might buy me a clean break, or at least some satisfaction in controlling the final scene. That evening, I waited in the living room with a quiet dread. Emily came home. She glanced at me, said nothing, then disappeared into the study. A few minutes later, she emerged holding a stack of bills far larger than what I'd left behind. My guess is she'd rummaged for even more. Maybe found hidden envelopes of savings, rummaged for anything valuable. I caught a glimpse of the watch in her purse. She walked past me without so much as a goodbye, just a cold determination in her eyes, like she was on autopilot. She was gone before dawn the next day. I found a note scrawled on the kitchen table. "I'm sorry it had to be this way." Just that. No mention of love, no attempt to reconcile. She'd apparently left with John, or gone somewhere else, for all I knew. I roamed the house, every room eerily still, whispering to the walls as though they could reveal where it all went wrong. "Here, at this couch, you laughed while you were planning to leave me," I muttered. "Here in the hallway, you betrayed me with your silence." I pictured her in each space, lying, hiding, drifting further away. The house felt haunted. Strangely, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I felt hollowed out. Our son, Noah, yes, I still call him my son, was spending time at a friend's place, blissfully unaware of the storm that had torn through our lives. I knew I had to tell him something, eventually. But I wasn't ready to face those questions. Why is Mommy gone? Why is John around? Who am I to you, Daddy? Time, that same cruel enemy that had chipped away at our love, now slowed to a crawl. My days felt endless, each hour weighted with memories I wished I could delete. I stared at the empty closet where her clothes once hung, rummaged through the drawers where I found traces of her perfume, the faint scent of lilies. I spent a sleepless night on the couch, letting the TV drone on about worthless infomercials, hoping to drown out the relentless swirl in my mind. I told my boss I needed a leave of absence. He heard the hoarseness in my voice and didn't argue. The next few days I spent in a half-daze, cooking meals I barely touched, reading books I didn't absorb. I tried to call Emily's phone once or twice, just to see if she'd answer, to see if maybe she'd have a change of heart. She didn't pick up. I heard nothing from John either. It was as if they'd vanished, leaving behind only the echoes of a shattered life. One afternoon, I stepped into Noah's room and picked up one of his stuffed animals, a small dog with floppy ears. The memory of that day we bought it came rushing back. We were in a toy store, and Emily teased that the dog looked like me with its big ears. We laughed. God, we laughed. That was a time when we understood each other's jokes, when the warmth between us was real. In that moment, I realized how deeply unprepared I was for the question, "Dad, am I your real son?" Because the answer would always be yes in my heart, even if DNA said otherwise. The next day, I reached out to my mother to let her know Emily was gone. She sighed heavily, told me she was sorry, that she knew how much I cared. I didn't mention the infidelity or the paternity test. I just said, "It's over," and let the silence fill in the gaps. She whispered, "Time heals all wounds," the same cliché people always use. But time, to me, felt like an accomplice to the betrayal. It had let the cracks grow, day by day, until the whole foundation collapsed. Healing. Maybe one day. But for now, it felt like an eternity of emptiness. It wasn't until the end of that week that I heard from Emily's mother again, this time in a short phone call. She demanded to know why I'd left the safe open, why I practically forced Emily to run off with John. The gall of that statement nearly made me laugh. "I forced her," I repeated, my voice ice cold. "She made her choice a long time ago." The mother insisted that I was being cruel, that I owed Emily a second chance. I hung up. No point in arguing. I was done explaining myself to people who saw me as an obstacle instead of the husband she had betrayed. At night, the house felt like a graveyard. Shadows clung to the walls, whispering that I was alone and unmoored. I tried to find some solace in the routines, washing dishes, tidying up, vacuuming. But every corner reminded me of a betrayal that had stolen my sense of self. Who was I if not her husband, if not the father of Noah? The older you get, the more you cling to these definitions: father, provider, husband. With them gone, I felt cast adrift in a sea of emptiness. A few times, I thought about driving to the place where John might be, some small salon or an apartment downtown. I pictured banging on the door, demanding answers. But some calmer voice inside me whispered that it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. The truth was laid bare. Chasing them down would just feed a cycle of rage I wasn't sure I could handle. Instead, I latched on to the final piece of control. The knowledge that this wasn't my fault. No matter what twisted narrative Emily's mother or John might spin, I loved her the best I could. I provided. I was honest. Maybe I failed to see her drifting away. Maybe I wasn't as romantic or attentive as I should have been. But I didn't break my vows. I didn't lie. And that truth, that small anchor of self-worth, was all I had left to keep me from sinking. Days turned into weeks. I had to face practicalities, credit card bills, mortgage payments, the 1,000 little things that keep life chugging along. Noah came home, asking why Mommy was away. My heart clenched each time I gently deflected. She's staying with a friend for a bit. She loves you, buddy. I couldn't bring myself to break his world into pieces yet. Maybe that was cowardly, but I wanted him to hold on to some innocence just a little longer. After he fell asleep, I'd watch him, letting the quiet hum of his breathing soothe me. Regardless of biology, I'd been his father for 6 years. Nothing could erase that. Eventually, an envelope with Emily's handwriting arrived. No return address. Inside was a short note. I need some time, Mark. Please don't make this worse. It ended without a signature, as if she couldn't even bring herself to write, "Love, Emily." I stared at it, feeling an odd mixture of anger and pity. She had left. She had taken John and my money. And now she needed time. Time for what? To see if John was really the next best thing. To see if I might beg her to come back. I tossed the note into the fireplace, lit a match, and watched the edges curl black. Don't make this worse, I repeated to myself, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. As though my existence alone was an inconvenience to her. Then again, maybe that's exactly how she saw me now. An inconvenient piece of her old life that refused to vanish quietly. When the divorce papers arrived not long after, I felt a strange sense of relief. There it was, the final nail in the coffin. We agreed, through attorneys, to keep things civil. She insisted on no legal claim to the house. Apparently, the money from the safe was enough for her to start over. I assumed she and John might eventually get a place together. The papers were a formality, but one that severed the last illusions of my marriage. I signed them, my hand steady but my spirit shaking. I found a grief counselor, a soft-spoken older man named Charles, who specialized in male emotional expression. He reminded me of my father in a gentle way, with gray hair and kind eyes. I sat in his cramped office, the walls lined with books about trauma and healing, and I told him everything. Maybe I needed that safe space to confess my anger, my confusion, my heartbreak. Charles listened, occasionally nodding, letting me put voice to the chaos swirling inside. His only question, "Who are you now, Mark, separate from her?" I had no answer. Time marched on. I sold off some of the furniture that felt too entwined with her memory. A dining table we picked out together, a lounge chair where she used to read her magazines. Piece by piece, I stripped the house of her presence. Sometimes I found small traces of her. A hairpin tucked behind a dresser, a note reminding herself to pick up groceries. Each one a tiny dagger. But I kept going, day by day, forging a routine. I woke up, made Noah breakfast, got him to school. On weekends, I tried to do something memorable with him. A trip to the park, a movie marathon. I held him tighter, dreading the day he might ask for a deeper explanation. Months slipped by. Emily never returned. She sent an occasional text. "Hope you're doing well. Tell Noah I love him." They felt more like an echo of guilt than genuine care, but I always replied politely, never letting my resentment show. I wanted to keep some channel open for Noah's sake, if not for mine. John never reached out. He was a ghost in my life, a fleeting presence that left a trail of betrayal. One night, as I washed dishes in the dim light of the kitchen, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger at Emily for her cruelty, sorrow for the broken home, pity for the man I used to be. Part of me still wondered if I could have saved us by being a better husband, by noticing the signs earlier. But another part, the deeper, more honest part, recognized that she'd made a conscious choice. She'd opened herself to an affair, hidden it, and lied to my face. No matter my failings, her betrayal was on her. I also found myself questioning the nature of love, how easily it can transform from a warm fortress to a prison of illusions. Maybe in the end, I'd never truly known her. Or maybe time, that patient saboteur, had worn her down until she sought excitement in another pair of arms. I was left with the wreckage, forced to pick up the pieces and wonder who I was, if not her husband. The night I finally broke down, truly broke down, was when I found an old anniversary card stashed in a drawer. It read, "To my forever love," in her graceful handwriting, dated just 3 years ago. I read it, reread it, let the words blur as tears filled my eyes. All the suppressed pain, the stoic facade, the seething anger, I let it loose in a quiet, racking sob that took me to my knees. Time didn't stop for my tears, but I allowed myself that moment of raw, unfiltered grief. I punched the floor once, a dull thud that left my knuckles aching, and then I sank back and closed my eyes. It was a painful release, but it was mine, and I needed it to begin healing. Life after that slowly found a rhythm. I returned to work. My boss welcomed me back with a cautious handshake, sympathy in his eyes. I declined all office small talk about how are things at home. I poured my energy into the job, and in turn, it distracted me from the rest of my life. In the evenings, I cooked dinner for Noah, supervised his homework, and read bedtime stories. Sometimes I'd feel a pang of sorrow watching him drift off to sleep, knowing he was a living contradiction. Legally my son, biologically not. Yet that never changed how much I loved him. In a final twist of irony, the results of that wine DNA test arrived in my email inbox, long delayed. It recommended I try a spicy Shiraz. I stared at the message, half laughing at the absurdity. Everything had collapsed because of a novelty test, a silly gimmick that set off a chain reaction. I deleted the email without reading further. Days turned to weeks, then to months, and with them came the acceptance that my marriage was over. I got used to the hush in the house, the emptiness in my bed. I learned to function alone, cooking for 2 instead of 3, occasionally meeting an old friend for a drink. But each morning, I'd look in the mirror and feel an echo of that question Charles posed. Who am I now, stripped of the identity I once had? A single father, a wounded man, a walking question mark. Still, I found glimpses of hope in unexpected places. The crisp smell of autumn leaves reminded me that seasons change, that nature moves on. The laughter of Noah in the backyard, chasing a ball, reminded me that love exists beyond bloodlines. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand in the doorway of his room, watching him breathe softly, and think about how time can both destroy and heal. Perhaps it was destroying the illusions in my life, but it might also give me a chance to rebuild something new and authentic. Eventually, Emily contacted me with some vague talk about seeing Noah. She set up a weekend visit, arrived with John in tow. They parked out front, and I watched from the window, my stomach twisting. John held her hand as they walked up to the door. This time, I didn't hide or seethe. I opened the door calmly and let them in. Emily tried to meet my eyes, but I kept my gaze on the floor, as though I was afraid I'd see something in her face that would tear open old wounds. John stood awkwardly behind her. "Hey, man," he mumbled. I said nothing, just nodded. Noah rushed in from the living room, excited to see his mother. She knelt, hugging him, that same perfume drifting through the air. For a fleeting moment, I remembered the times we'd been a family. Now, we were strangers with overlapping responsibilities. I stayed out of the way, let them spend time together. John hovered at the edges, uncertain how to act. Part of me wanted to tear his head off, but I felt more pity than rage. He was a younger man with a misplaced sense of adventure, caught in something that had deeper consequences than he could handle. Perhaps that was punishment enough. When they left, Emily paused at the door, turned to me. "Mark," she said softly, "thank you for letting me see him." I nodded again, Feeling no urge to reply, she sighed. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Truly." Then she left, John's hand gently guiding her down the porch steps. I stood there, watching the car pull away, letting the silence seep in again. I felt neither closure nor renewed pain, just the hollow acceptance that this was the reality I had to live with. Time continues its slow march. I still have nightmares sometimes, visions of that bedroom scene replaying in my mind with nauseating clarity. But each morning, the sting lessens. I've discovered a quiet strength I never knew I had, an ability to endure heartbreak without letting it define me entirely. I focus on building a stable future for Noah. I remain haunted by questions of identity, but I'm learning that maybe the question itself, who am I now, isn't answered by a single label or role. Maybe it's a continuous journey, shaped by every choice I make moving forward. I haven't forgiven her, not in the sense of letting go of the hurt, but I've stopped letting the anger poison my life. I suppose that's its own version of mercy, to both her and me. She made her choices, I made mine. I have no desire to see their relationship unravel or to sabotage them. My revenge, if you want to call it that, was giving them exactly what they wanted. It's a strange feeling, stepping back to observe their lives from a distance, like watching a play where I once played the lead role, but now I'm just a face in the audience. Still, I can't deny a grim satisfaction in how it all ended. Her leaving with John, and more money than I initially left in the safe. She took the watch too, which stings. Yet, I remained in the home we once shared, the echoes of our history swirling around me like restless ghosts. I didn't burn it down in fury or try to tear everything apart. I just let them perform their final act, the stage lights dimming on the illusions they built. And maybe that's how I reclaim my power, by refusing to be a victim, by writing my own ending in quiet defiance of her betrayal. So here I stand, months later, calmer, though not healed. The memory of her cold detachment still weighs on my heart, a reminder of how quickly warmth can vanish when trust is broken. Sometimes at night, I pace the house, whispering to the walls again, naming each room where she smiled, lied, betrayed, or embraced me. It's a strange ritual, but it helps me process the scars. I let the words hang in the air, part eulogy, part exorcism. There are moments, brief and fleeting, when I catch sight of my reflection in the window and barely recognize the man staring back. He looks older, sharper around the edges, and yet emptier inside. That man has learned that time can be an enemy, chipping away at relationships until there's nothing left but dust. He's also learned that once everything is stripped away, titles, roles, illusions, you have to decide if the core of who you are can still stand. And so I carry on, forging a new future one day at a time. Noah deserves a father, and I can still be that man, biology be damned. In quiet moments, I catch a glimpse of hope flickering at the edges of my mind, like a distant lighthouse on a stormy night. Maybe one day, I'll rebuild a life that has no trace of her lies, no echo of John's presence. For now, I focus on doing the small things right, being honest with myself, being present for Noah, letting the pain carve out new strength in me. I don't claim to have all the answers. I'm just a man who discovered that the woman he loved had a child that wasn't his, who walked in on her in the arms of another man, and who chose not to scream or rage, but to let them have their exit while he stood in the remains of a broken promise. Perhaps that's not the grand revenge some might crave. Yet it's what I have. A quiet resolve, an acceptance that the person I once was no longer exists, replaced by someone a little harder, a little sadder, but maybe, just maybe, a little wiser. In the end, I wrote the final chapter of my own story, even if it wasn't the tale of reconciliation, or happily ever after. I learned that betrayal doesn't always need a violent conclusion. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is step aside and let the unfaithful unravel their own future. Because once trust is shattered, you're left with two choices: cling to the shards and let them cut you to pieces, or drop them and move on, leaving the guilt and illusions behind. And so I move on, day by day, breath by breath. I've lost my wife, discovered my son isn't mine by blood, and surrendered the illusions of a life I thought was secure. But I'm still here, forging a path on unsteady ground, carrying the weight of memory and the faint hope that tomorrow might hurt a little less than today. That's my truth. That's my life now. And no matter what they took from me, I still hold the pen to write whatever comes next.